point, there we go. At this point, I would like to ask John and Joel with RCO and DFW to introduce themselves. They're going to be presenting today. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Joy. Good morning, everybody. I'm John Foltz with the Recreation and Conservation Office. I'm an outdoor grant manager and support the Brian Abbott Fish Bear Removal Board program. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Joy. And good morning, everybody. My name is Joel Ingram. I work with Washington Fish and Wildlife. I am a scoping biologist with the department and work to support the technical review teams that review and provide comment on these fish barrier removal board applications.
Excellent. Thank you, John and Joel. Okay, so I think we need to advance the slides. Would like all attendees to add your name and affiliation into the chat if you would. And we can continue to remind folks of that, Kate. And if you can advance the slide. So for the next 40 minutes, RCO and DFW, so Joel and John, are going to present an overview of the grant application process. And then we have time until noon to respond to all of your questions or comments. So we will stay on as long as people have questions before noon. Next slide. Okay. So this is a Zoom webinar. Some of you may have used it. Just want to show you how to interact with it. So you can use the chat for just general comments or questions. But really, we'd like to point you to the Q&A if you have questions around the process, the application process, and you can see where that is. You take your cursor and you move it down the screen. It should come up and you can see the Q&A there. Also, when we move to the Q&A period of this webinar, and if you just like to ask a direct question, you can go ahead and it says raise hand in the slide, but in actuality, you need to go down to reactions. And once you hit reactions, there'll be an opportunity to raise your hand. And so really invite you to start asking your questions as John and Joel are presenting. Then you'll be in the queue and we'll start with those questions and we'll go in order of the questions. Whether it be in the Q&A or you raise your hand. All right, with that, I think that is all I have. Kate, what am I missing? Anything? No, all right.
That's good.
Well, okay, we're gonna hand it off to provide the grant overview presentation. So I believe I'm handing it off to you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Joy. And before we get going, we're going to jump right into it here in a second. I'm just going to ask all of our panelists and hosts to flip off their videos. Because we're recording this, we're going to post it to YouTube. And actually, we've been advised by our communications folks that having videos on is somewhat distracting from the content. So we'll just flip off videos here. We'll flip them back on when we get to Q&A. But you'll just be hearing our voices, so... All right, I think I got that right. And just real quick, a sound check here. Make sure, Joy, am I coming through all right?
Sounds good.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you all. Again, I'm John Foltz. I'm an outdoor grant manager and the Brian Abbott Fish Program lead for RCO. So in an attempt to shorten up the live workshop from years past and make it easier to consume and find information on different application topics, we've chosen to split the workshop into a live portion that we're conducting today and a set of pre-recorded topical modules that are listed here on the left side of the slide. The live workshop today will cover key points of the application as well as new items for the 27-29 biennium. This workshop isn't meant to be comprehensive and will point you to RCO Grant Manual 22. The more detailed pre-recorded application modules I just noted, and specific points of contact for future questions. In the slide here, you can see the red arrow. This is the RCO, Brian Abbott Fishbear Removal Board page, and you'll be able to find the recordings of today's workshop, including the workshop slides and the pre-recorded content right there on that web page. The pre-recorded modules are still in process, but they'll be available shortly. Next slide, please. So the main topics we're going to hit on today are new items for this grant round, the grant round timeline, eligibility considerations, project types that you can apply for grant funding for, technical assistance and review, match for the program, and program contacts. Next slide, please. So new for this grant round, we are implementing the board's effort on modernizing match for the program. We are implementing the qualitative habitat assessment minimum score criteria and the application workshop modules that I just noted. Additionally, you can find the following minor updates in Manual 22. These include Climate Commitment Act funding requirements. These funds have been recently provided to the board for grant funding and come with a few extra minor requirements such as signage and advertising. The cost estimates and grant requests are now rounded to the nearest $1,000. This is a change from years past, so please keep this in mind when developing your budget. And we've strengthened the language around geotechnical investigation being required at the preliminary design level. That's always been a requirement, but we just added some detail there, making sure folks were aware of that requirement. We've also clarified the inspection and maintenance requirements for alternative design type projects. We'll talk a little bit about that as we get into the presentation. We've also clarified the technical review process and included minor updates to the scoring criteria. Next slide, please. So here's the grant round calendar or the timeline. This is taken directly from Manual 22. PRISM, the online program you'll be applying through, is open for applications now, with applications being due on January 26th. From January 26th to April, RCO and WDF&W will be reviewing and providing feedback to sponsors, who then have until May 7th to revise and submit the final application for WDF&W to score. The board will then review, rank, and approve a prioritized project list to submit to the legislature in August of next year. Next slide, please. So before I go any further, I wanted to share the hyperlinks for the Brian Abbott Fishbear Removal Board program. RCO hosts the grant application information, the PRISM database, and grant-related material. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife hosts the board's website and meeting material and associated content. So again, these slides will be available after this workshop, and you can use them to get around to these different websites. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to get into eligibility requirements. So project eligibility is something that a sponsor should dig into early. I'll walk through project eligibility, eligible applicants, and eligible land ownership before handing it off to Joel to go through the eligible project types. So project eligibility. So first and foremost, if there's a full barrier downstream of the project, there must be a documented commitment for it to be corrected within 5 years of the current Brian Abbott Fishbear Removal Board project application submission due date. Otherwise, complete barriers downstream make the project ineligible. Natural barriers are also not eligible for correction. And there must be documented current or historic anadromous species use at the project location. The project you're applying for can't be part of a court-ordered requirement or mitigation requirement. The barrier cannot be in federal ownership. The correction must result in full fish passage according to WDF&W criteria for salmon and steelhead. The linear gain from the project must be greater than 0. And new for this year is the Qualitative Habitat Assessment, or QHA, minimum score of 300. And Joel will get into a little detail about how the QHA is calculated in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay. So eligible applicants, we've got a wide range of eligible applicants. So who can apply? Cities, counties, special purpose districts, tribes, nonprofits, and state agencies are all eligible applicants. However, private third-party organizations are not eligible sponsors for the board. Next slide, please. In addition to the eligible applicants, we also have a requirement for where the project occurs in eligible land ownership. So barriers on private, publicly owned, or in tribal ownership are all eligible for board funding. However, road maintenance and abandonment plan, or RMAP, required barriers, or those identified in the culvert case injunction, as well as those in federal ownership, are not eligible for this program. Alrighty, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joel to highlight the project types that you can seek funding for.
Thanks, John. I'm going to now talk through the different project types that are available through FBRB. First, we have planning projects, also commonly referred to as design projects. Planning grants are funded to create a final design for fish passage barrier corrections. Next, we have restoration projects, also commonly referred to as construction projects. Restoration grants are funded to implement an already designed fish passage project. And finally, we have restoration design build projects. These grants are funded to do complete elements of both different project types. We will dive into some of the specifics of these individual project types next. Next slide. Planning projects. These projects are in a final design. These projects end in a final design that is ready for implementation or construction of a fish passage project. At the beginning of this project type, there is little technical information that's already been collected. You essentially have a site that you know is a barrier. The site has good habitat length and quality that will be opened by the barrier correction. You have willingness of the landowner to start in on a design, and your project meets the eligibility requirements previously discussed. Planning projects typically include a variety of design-related steps, including feasibility or scoping studies, an alternatives analysis, and the completion of preliminary and final designs of a project that will be constructed in a later phase. There are document review and comment steps as part of this planning advances. The technical review team, or TRT, will review and comment and approve planning projects at each individual step. These grants are typically completed within 2 years and lead to a shovel-ready project design. Manual 22 in Appendix C is where all of the specific requirements for these planning projects can be found. Additionally, WDFW's Water Crossing Design Guidelines is a manual that lays out the process for understanding stream dynamics at water crossings and highlights some of the specific requirements and metrics that need to be met when designing a fish passage crossing. For these planning grants, We do have a criteria of preference. First, we're looking for abandonment projects. We always want to remove crossing if possible. Our next project type would be a bridge, or preference would be a bridge. And finally is a stream simulation culvert. Next slide. Next, we have restoration or construction projects. This project type is for the implementation of a fish passage barrier correction. This project type requires that a preliminary level of design is submitted along with the application materials. A higher level of design may also be submitted, but we at least need to see that preliminary design. Preliminary designs typically include feasibility and alternatives analysis portion. It selects the preferred alternative and includes plans and a design report. The plans and the design report need to provide a detailed understanding and quantification of all of the major project elements that meet the qualifications for receiving a construction permit. This is some of the things we're looking for is, structure size, structure type, any roadway adjustments that need to occur, utilities that need to be manipulated as part of those individual designs, and also all of the stream related elements. So stream bed material, stream bed shape, any habitat complexity features that are going to be included in the design all need to be included in those preliminary designs. Preliminary plans this year also need to include the specific site-specific geotechnical investigation to understand the soil stabilities at those individual sites. It informs some of that subsurface work that is needed for those footings and really informs what the overall cost is for some of these projects. TRT will review whatever the highest level of design materials are available at the time the agreement is signed. Next slide. Finally, we have the design build project type. So this is a project with a total cost of less than $500,000 and allows for the project to complete all the steps of the design process and the construction process so long as it occurs below that dollar cap. These projects are typically your smaller project types like private driveway crossings, small stream crossings, or structural removal or abandonment projects. Since these projects need to complete a full design portion of the project, the same TRT review process that was laid out for planning grants also applies to these projects. It's important to note that you will not see a design build project type when you're applying in PRISM. You will need to select a design project and then connect with your RCO manager who will set up this specific design type for you. Of course, you can reach out to us at any time, either WDFW or RCO staff, and talk about your project and your desire to fit into this design build project before final application submittal, and we'll get you all set up. Next slide. So WDFW does provide a whole host of different technical assistance. FPDSI stands for Fish Passage and Diversion Screening Inventory. This is our database that we maintain online with all of our barriers that have been assessed out in the field. Occasionally, we will have an applicant that has found a new barrier that has not been assessed. And so we have the ability to go out and run through the protocols and assess those previously unassessed barriers to determine what the barrier status is. Other examples of some of the immediate technical assistance that we can provide is if a barrier crossing needs a higher level of assessment, whether that's a level B assessment, which is a little bit more in depth than our level A assessment, or for very complex sites, like tidally influenced sites, we may need to pull in some engineering assistance. And we have the ability to do that and help out applicants to make sure that we have a really good understanding about what that barrier status is as these projects are being applied for. Additionally, if your barrier that you would like to submit for has an assessment that is older than 10 years, we are going to want to reassess that barrier to make sure that it's the same level of passability as previous, or that our information is as accurate as possible. These barrier assessments are a snapshot in time, and systems do change, and barriers typically get worse. Sometimes they will improve, but we want to make sure that we are aware of whatever the current status of that barrier is. We also are able to assign species use for these individual systems, and review the FBRB process, or explain a little bit more about the state-based barrier assessment protocol. Next slide. All right, the qualitative habitat assessment, or the QHA. The QHA was used during our previous biennium and is used as a reference document for the technical review team. The QHA is really an assessment of the habitat that is available upstream of these crossings, and attempts to make a real apples to apples comparison about what the benefit is for the correction of these individual barriers. The QHA is included in scoring and ranking, and it does have that minimum project eligibility score, which we'll get into in a little bit. This is a really important one here. The QHA is completed by WDFW technicians or biologists. We can provide you with what we're looking for and how we're looking at it, but we want these QHAs to be a standardized process and completed by the same people every time. And so these scores that come out are done by our individual teams to create that consistency. Score is based on the length of habitat gain, modified by the presence of upstream barriers, and the scores for 5 different habitat metrics. Next slide. These QHAs are required for all submitted projects, which, as I said previously, are going to be completed by WDFW staff. If you are submitting a project that was submitted during our last round, that QHA has already been completed. And unless there is a substantial difference in the upstream habitat as compared to 2 years ago, we will probably use that existing score. For all new submitted projects, we will be going out and doing these assessments. The assessment includes the target stream and upstream tributaries up to the first total barrier, or the third partial barrier, or the end of fish use. And those 5 habitat metrics are the riparian area, the habitat complexity in the stream channel itself, canopy cover, spawning potential, so that has to do with gravel size and consistency, and then hydraulic alterations. So if there's bank modifications or bank hardening or armoring anywhere along the system. And finally, we do have that minimum 300 score to be eligible for the program. Next slide. Okay, we will talk a little bit about the TRT already and their involvement in the design process. The TRT includes, at a minimum, a WDFW fish passage biologist and a WDFW engineer. We will often include the regional WDFW permitting biologist and tribal biologist as part of that review process, if they have the time and the ability to participate. And depending on the level of complexity, we may pull in some other professionals to sit on that TRT and advise any comments or direction that the project should move. Our review mainly follows the steps outlined in WDFW's water crossing design guidelines. For planning projects, this includes review and TRT approval at the correction analysis form, or CAF level, or the alternatives analysis, and the preliminary design stage, and ultimately the final design stage. For restoration projects, this includes review and TRT approval of the final design stage, as preliminary designs are required with the application materials. Keep in mind that this is not a single review at each step for approval. Please plan for these reviews in your budget and timelines. So the way that these kind of TRT review processes really work is we try to say it's a conversation. We will provide comments. We're looking for some sort of written response, and then typically we have a meeting and we work through any differences between the established design process and where the project is going. Next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the application review and scoring process. Again, the full evaluation criteria is located in Manual 22, Appendix B, and is in Prism Online. Besides project eligibility requirements, there are two main components for the evaluation: the staffed score criteria and the team scored evaluation criteria. Staff scored criteria are clear-cut metrics, and applicants will be able to view their scores and get feedback if requested. Team scored evaluation criteria will be completed by WDFW, with final evaluations occurring following the May application deadline, typically between May and August. If you have any questions about this process, reach out to one of the TRT scoping biologists. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it back to John.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. Before I get into this next slide here, I just wanted to remind folks, if you've got a question, we're seeing some good questions come into the chat. That's great. We are unable to reply to the questions in the chat. If you could go down to the Q&A button at the bottom and type it in there, you can get a live response there from our team members at RCO and DFNW. We'll also bring it up during the Q&A to make sure that the questions you got answered. But yeah, appreciate that, Joel. I would say the TRT bios are going to be your friends. Make sure to get in touch with them early and often. That's going to be Casey Costello, Joel Ingram, and Dan Kaufman at this point in time. So I'm going to jump into ineligible project elements. Ineligible project elements include acquisition for this program. That's all of the above here: fee simple, conservation easements, and rights of way. So you need to take care of that with other funding. Habitat elements outside of the area of disturbance for the fish passage work to be done is ineligible. Unrequired upgrades to infrastructure, it's kind of got to be replaced in kind, as well as indirect costs are ineligible at this point in time for the Brian Abbott Fish Bear Removal Board program. I want to note this is not an exhaustive list. If you're unsure if your costs are eligible for the grant program, please contact your grant manager and we can work through those details. I also want to note that this also applies to matching funds. If the item is not eligible for reimbursement, it's not eligible for match. Next slide, please. All right, this one's going to flip through kind of quick here. It's a flow chart of the grant process and what steps you need to take from the beginning when you submit your application to the finale when the board approves the project list to submit to the legislature. So you're going to start your application in Prism Online. Prism is now open right now if you want to jump in and start your application. Next, you'll complete and submit the Prism Online application and your attachments by January 26th. WDF&W will conduct an on-site review of the barrier or barriers in your proposal. This is what informs the QHA score. There was a question, I think, in the chat about if DF&W unilaterally completes the QHAs, and the answer is yes. There's a barrier survey, which includes the QHA for all projects that are submitted to the board, so we have the same team conducting those surveys. Next, you'll have applications, the ability to refine your applications based upon DF&W and RCO comments and feedback that occurs there between the January and the May final application deadline. And then final applications are due in Prism Online May 7th. Make sure you hit submit, give yourself some extra time there. When there's a bunch of people submitting applications, sometimes Prism gets a little overloaded, and you want to make sure to give yourself plenty of time there so you don't miss the deadline. Note that applications cannot be changed after this date. So the May 7th deadline is essentially the end of the application effort for applicants. All the items that you see on the right side of the slide are the barrier board review and evaluation and ranking process steps. For other important dates, you can find a complete schedule for the grant round on the RCO website or just after the table of contents and Manual 22. Next slide, please. So the final revised application. So again, the final revised application deadline is May 7th. And I'm just reiterating that you've got time between the initial deadline of January 26th and the final application due date of May 7th to make changes. Just make sure you're discussing these changes with RCO and DF&W so that we know, what's been changed from the initial application so that we can track that. Okay, next slide, please. A few tips for applying based upon past grant rounds. So I'd just recommend folks be thorough. I know this goes without saying, but keep in mind you likely have a great deal of institutional knowledge about your project and your proposal that the reviewers will not have. So it may seem obvious to you, but it's not always obvious to those that are just learning about the project and the barrier at the time of application. Follow the application checklist. This checklist is located in Appendix D of Manual 22, and this is a summary of all the required material you'll need for your application. Make sure to familiarize yourself with the evaluation criteria. I can't stress this enough. As Joel mentioned, the full questions and evaluation criteria are in both Manual 22 and in the Prism Online application itself for reference. Make sure you carefully read and respond to the criteria to make sure that you provide enough information to earn the maximum number of points for your project. The clearer and better the information you include, the better that folks will be able to provide technical feedback and help improve your project application. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk a little bit about match. So match is the project sponsor's share of the project costs. As previously noted, match must be identified for eligible activities. If the project cost is ineligible for reimbursement, if it's eligible for reimbursement, then it is eligible as match. The minimum program match is 15% with some exceptions that I'll get into in the following slides here. This is kind of the hook for today. Hopefully people are sticking on to learn about match and our match modernization effort. Next slide, please, Kate. Okay, some examples of eligible and ineligible match. Match can be monetary, that includes cash, in-kind donations, or other grant funding. For in-kind donations, there are limitations. Make sure you check out and consult RCO Manual 8 to get the details about what the limitations are. Some ineligible match items include mitigation efforts, mitigation activities or funds, the Family Forest and Fish Passage Program funding. You cannot use that grant program as a match to a Brian Abbott Barrier Board project. You cannot include ineligible grant activities as match, and again, indirect costs are not currently eligible for this program. For match to count for your project, it must be written in the scope of work for the agreement and must be within the timeline of your agreement unless approved as a pre-agreement cost by your grant manager. If you're not sure about any of this, follow up with your designated grant manager. Next slide, please. Okay, new for the grant round, this grant round are 2 options for reduced match. Option 1, we're going to call a match cap. If you're applying for a planning, design-only grant and requesting less than $500,000, then no match is required as long as the project is completed within 24 months. If you would like to go for longer than 24 months, that's when a match will become a requirement. If you're applying for a restoration grant for project construction and you're requesting less than $750,000, again, no match is required for this application. For either project type requesting more than those 2 amounts, you will need to provide the 15% minimum match requirement. However, in addition to this match cap option, we have a second option for a decreased match requirement. Next slide. So if those 2 options were the wholesale match waiver, these second options are available for match certification credit and reduction, and they can be found here on the match certification credit and reduction form on the RCO Brian Abbott Fishbury Removal Board program webpage that's highlighted there in yellow on the right. So if your project doesn't receive a match waiver under the match cap option, you can voluntarily apply for a match credit or reduction using the form highlighted. There are 3 options on this form. At this time, you only need to satisfy one of the 3 options for a match credit or reduction. The first option is that your project is a priority barrier for correction according to a regionally approved or watershed approved barrier prioritization. We've been working with the salmon recovery regions and salmon recovery lead entities at a watershed scale to gather information on existing barrier prioritizations. If your barrier is identified in the top 20% of any of these prioritizations, you can apply for a waiver. Barrier board staff will review this request and compare it to the available barrier prioritizations for approval. We will let the sponsor know if the match reduction request is approved as soon as possible after applications are submitted. The second option is getting a match credit for a coordinated fish passage correction. For this option, the sponsor must demonstrate that another fish passage correction project has been funded for correction in the same watershed, that being the same watershed being defined as a hydrologic unit code 10 or HUC 10 watershed scale. Eligible matching projects include all phases of design, feasibility studies, and other activities that are specific to a particular barrier removal. The matching project must meet the following criteria. The barrier being used as credit was not fully or partially funded by the barrier board or previously used as match for a barrier board funded project. Secondly, you must have a grant agreement in place or have completed construction of the matching barrier in the past 4 years at the time the barrier board grant is awarded, and this will be in July of 2027 for this grant round. The project that's being used as match must result in 100% passable barrier correction per WDF&W barrier assessment guidelines. The third option is a project sponsor hardship. This option can be used if the project sponsor does not have the fiscal or administrative resources to provide the required 15% matching funds, and you are not able to check one of the other previous two boxes in this form. Eligibility for this waiver is determined using the state distressed or overburdened databases. Those web links are provided in the form. You can click on those to see if your project is located within one of the either countywide polygons or it's a smaller geographic envelope for between the two databases. Please have a look at Manual 22 and the match certification credit and reduction form for more information, or reach out to your grant manager. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to a few key items to consider when completing your application. The first is culture resources. When funded, RCO will make an initial assessment of what needs to be done for culture resources. The culture resource review process requires review, analysis, and consultation with the state or federal lead agency, the Washington Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, or DAP, and affected tribes. This is required before you can begin any ground disturbing work. You must receive a notice to proceed, and activities are not eligible if review is not complete, not eligible for reimbursement. RCO will determine the pathway and initiate culture resource consultation. It's really important to help with this determination. Please describe any ground disturbing work, including design work that requires geotech or other ground disturbing activities in your application, and map your area of potential effect appropriately in PRISM. I can't stress how important this is. Outcomes of culture resource review may require sponsors to conduct a culture resource survey, have an archaeologist on site during activity for monitoring, might require mitigation of impacts or effects, or you might be required to obtain a special permit or have an inadvertent discovery plan on hand. These have significant costs associated with them, so be sure to plan ahead and include in your budget for staff time and other potential assessment or consultation costs. This is just a real quick summary of culture resources. Please make sure to watch the culture resource application module that will be recorded on the RCO website under application workshop. Next slide, please. Okay, permitting. It's the responsibility of the project sponsor to obtain the required permits. To streamline the environmental permitting process, multiple state and federal regulatory agencies have joined forces to create one application that people can use to apply for more than one permit at a time. This is called the Joint Aquatic Resource Permit Application, or JARPA. You can start a hydraulic project approval, or HPA, application on the Department of Fish and Wildlife's online aquatic protection permitting system, or apps, and convert that to a draft JARPA application if other relevant permits are needed. If you will need multiple permits, you can save time by beginning with the HPA and the DF&W apps system and then convert it to a JARPA for the rest. Fish habitat enhancement projects may qualify for a streamlined HPA approval through DF&W that exempts the project from local government permits and associated fees, unless the department determines that the scale of the project raises concerns regarding public health and safety. Again, for more on permits, please see the pre-recorded permit module. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about project control and tenure, and specifically the landowner agreement. We funded some excellent restoration projects on both private and public land. In the case the project doesn't occur on property owned by the sponsor, we're going to need a landowner agreement. Be sure to include landowners early in your planning process to ensure your restoration proposal is compatible with other required uses and that they allow you permission to do the work. We'll need a signed landowner agreement before construction can start. If the project occurs on sponsor-owned property, we don't need a landowner agreement. We need a stewardship plan, and that will need to be completed before the project is closed. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Joel to take us through the last couple slides here.
Thanks, John. That is all some really great information, especially that match modernization portion. That is a big change for this year. So all those applicants, make sure you review that material on the RCO webpage and understand that to get as much benefit out of that as possible. Project construction. I mean, it's really important not to begin construction until you have all of these things listed here completed. A project agreement that's been signed with RCO. The TRT is reviewed and approved your final designs. You have a secured site control and approval with a landowner agreement. Cultural resources consultation has been completed, and you have all of your required permits in hand. It's important to know that RCO cannot and will not reimburse for any restoration work that is completed until all of these elements are completed and signed off. The next slide, please. And again, here are just some of those key dates. We've shown this up a couple of times, but I'm going to run through it again. October 1st, which is a couple days ago, the grant round opened and PRISM applications are able to be submitted. January 26th, 2026 is when applications are due. Applicants can submit their complete applications via the PRISM online platform. And then between January 26th and May 7th of 2026, final applications can be revised up to that final due date of May 7th. So, but after that May 7th date, there are no changes, no additions, no edits to any of those application materials. Because in that period, May to August, is when WDFW staff is going to be looking at those projects and doing our scoring and ranking of those projects. And then we forward those on to the board, and we tentatively have a board meeting scheduled for August 18th, 2026, where the board will approve, hopefully approve, if they see fit, the ranked list of projects that were submitted for this biennium. And of course, check manual 22 for the complete schedule and any additional information. Next slide. You know, previously I had talked about WDFW technical assistance. Listed here are the team members of our specific unit that are focusing in on the FBRB related technical assistance work. Casey Costello and myself and Dan Kaufman are the scoping biologists doing the majority of the TRT review. Kaylee Couts is our section manager, and Riley Greenfield is our inventory and assessment crew supervisor, who can be contacted if you as an applicant need a re-inventory or barrier assessment or a QHA for your particular site. Next slide. And here are the RCO contacts. John Foltz, who's been speaking to you previously in this presentation, the program lead for RCO, FBRB, and some of his grant managers, Amy Bear, Allison Rubin, and Josh Lambert. Any of these individuals can help you with your application materials as you start submitting them into RCO in the PRISM platform. But also the PRISM platform itself will provide you who your specific grant manager is on the contacts page. So if you have a specific question for who is dealing with your application materials, refer to the PRISM application contacts page. Next slide. Now this slide has been shown a couple of times. This is the RCO FBRB website. If you aren't familiar with the program, the best place to go is this webpage. The Brian Abbott Fish Barrier Removal Board webpage should have all of the guidance forms, manuals, and information you need to have a successful applicant. The grant schedule is there. The schedule has all of the important dates that make up the grant round. The schedule is also printed in Manual 22, which is the program manual and all of the information for this grant process. You'll be able to find a link to that manual right there, grant manual, circled in red and with the big red arrow pointing to it. I would recommend you look it over and become very familiar with it, as it contains all the pertinent information regarding the program. The manual is updated each year for the upcoming grant round, so be sure you're looking at the most recent manual when you're completing your application. Next slide. And I think that takes us into questions.
All right. Thank you, John and Joel. We are moving into the Q&A period, and so feel free to continue to add questions into the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. Move your cursor down, that'll highlight all of your options, as well as if you would like to raise your hand and ask a question verbally, you can go down to reactions and you hit that pop up and you'll see raise hand. So thinking, folks asked some great questions already. We'd like to go through a few of those and just for others to hear, but also if there's any kind of follow-up from participants, we can address those as well. So with that, why don't we go ahead and start with the 3 questions in the queue that have not been answered. And so I'll go ahead and read from Walter. Is there a place where QHAs are listed, such as Salmonscape, etc.? Oh, you know what? I think we want to at some point introduce your staff, John and Joel, because they're going to be answering it as well. So maybe do that first, and then we'll move to the question.
Sure, thanks, Joy. Again, they're not my staff, they're my colleagues. So I've got with me today to help answer questions. Their contact information was noted in the slide deck, but Alice Rubin, Amy Barr, and Josh Lambert are all supporting the Brian Abbott Fish Barrier Removal Board program from RCO and have a great deal of insight and knowledge on the program.
And with us today from WDFW is Casey Costello, a fellow TRT scoping biologist, as well as Kaylee Kautz, our section manager.
Thank you for introducing your colleagues. Okay, Walter's question. Is there a place where QHAs are listed, such as Salmonscape, etc.?
Okay, I'll jump in. So now our QHAs are all kept just internally at DFW. They're pretty iterative and pretty dynamic. Many of them change every biennium. That said, any sponsor who wants a copy of the QHA that we have on file, they just need to let us know and we can send that their way.
I
Excellent.
note, I guess if folks are just trying to determine if they're going to be above the minimum score, well, Casey noted it is an iterative effort. In general, it's a length, number of meters times the quality of habitat gets you your QHA score. So you can guesstimate what your QHA is going to be without actually having DFW to complete the full QHA. But you guys are available, right, Casey? Anytime to request a survey for projects, and we would encourage folks to do that as early as possible, really.
All right. Thanks, John. Walter, let us know if you have any follow-up questions. Andrew asked, the acknowledgement form is required as a part of our application or needs to be submitted prior to completion of the planning project.
I can fill that one, Joy. So the landowner forms can be confusing. There's 3 of them, and the landowner acknowledgement form is required at the time of application, just to make sure that the landowners that you're working with understand that there's a project that's being proposed for funding. So landowner acknowledgement's required at time of application. We talked a little bit about the land ownership, the landowner agreement form, and that is required once the project is funded before construction is started. And then there's also a landowner certification form. And if you're funded, we'll need that signed off. And that's signed off by the project sponsor, just certifying that the properties that the project is planning to occur on, there's nothing that will interfere with project work proceeding in terms of land ownership.
Great. Anyone else want to weigh in on that, or did we get it?
That'd be great.
Okay, another question from P. Marinan, excuse me if I mispronounced your name. If we are not able to get it together for an application on this round, when will the application be due for the next round?
Yeah, good question. I can field that one too, Joy. So the Brian Abbott Fishbury Removal Board program is a biennial program. So a project list is submitted to the legislature once a biennium. So the next opportunity for this particular program will be 2 years from now. There's other RCO grant opportunities and also federal funding opportunities that, if you're interested, we can point you towards some of those options as well.
Excellent. Another question from the same participant. What is the maximum dollar amount for this grant?
We don't have a maximum dollar amount. I would just consider the program's history, and we'll have a pre-recorded application module on this, but historically the program has received between $20 and $50 million from the legislature, and the board likes to see multiple projects funded. There's been some larger projects that the board has funded a component of, but not the full thing, in the range of $25 million fish passage projects where the barrier board made up about a quarter of that. So typically we see projects ranging from $300,000 funding requests on the smaller side, up to several $1,000,000. I just encourage folks to look back at our previous project lists. There's some of the project scoring criteria revolves around matching and leveraged funds and other resources that are being brought to the table. So no current maximum amount at this point in time.
Okay. So staff might turn your attention to the question here from Glenn. I'm just going to read the condensed version, but you might want to scan the longer version with the details. Would this or the FFP fund replacement for an existing fish ladder and possibly minor refurbishing of the dam itself for safety and to ensure fish ladder is correctly integrated at a small dam or on private land?
Digesting this question here, Joy.
Yeah, I'll kind of take a stab at this one. I mean, the requirement of the program is complete remediation of the barrier itself. And I think there's a lot of different ways that can occur. Typically, the program is not so keen on like the old fishway style, but there are potentially other designed solutions that could be considered at this location. Further down in the question, it talks about a previous attempt to design a high flow channel or some sort of bypass channel around the project site. That would be an alternative. If the pond is to remain, roughened channel or some sort of stream bed elevational control to maintain that pond upstream, but allow passage into that system, that could be something that is allowed through the program. I would say this is a pretty specific question. So feel free to reach out to us at the WDFW side, and we can throw around some considerations and things to think about as you submit your application. And we can have lengthy discussions and figure out eligibility of this specific site. This is kind of a one-off. This isn't just a crossing under a roadway. This is a very specific site, and any solution here is going to be very site specific. So feel free to reach out to us and let's start a conversation.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Glenn had another question. Was it answered? Let me see.
Yeah, Joy,
Here we
this
go.
is Josh from RTO.
Yeah, do you mind reading? Well, why don't I read Glenn's question and then you can answer it verbally. Glenn's thinking that a feasibility study that considers alternatives that include full abandonment plus restoration might be a fundable project, and try to use the process as an educational or engagement opportunity and get landowner to fully consider the value of removing the barrier altogether. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I did provide an answer, but I want to clarify, feasibility is a stage that's allowable in a planning project with fish barrier removal board funds. However, the final deliverable for a planning project is final design. So if it's not clear that there's going to be if that's going to move too soon for a landowner and the solutions aren't clear, like abandonment's not like the proposed design deliverable, we would recommend maybe a different funding source like the surfboard, or depending on where you're working, like in a regional area like the coast, like Wickery. Another funding program that allows you to scope a project to just feasibility and maybe conceptual might be more appropriate for that type of work.
Excellent. Question from Andrew. Can you share what the historical competitiveness of the grant program looks like? Example, total funds requested versus awarded in recent application rounds.
Can jump in on that one, Joy. Take these with a grain of salt. This is off the top of my head. Typically in the last few grant rounds, requests have been between 60 and 100 million, and legislative funding has been, in that range of 25 to 50. I think the last biennium was something of an anomaly, where we had 102 projects that were ranked and were reviewed and ranked by the board, and through various funding, including the state legislative supplemental session, we were able to get down to project 100, which I think was impressive and also not likely to happen again to get that far. This last biennium, 25-27 biennium, I believe the board ranked and prioritized 55 projects, and the legislature ended up funding down to project number 14.
Andrew, let us know if you have any follow-up there. There's a question that
Can I add to that real quick, Joy? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Alice.
I just wanted to mention that the funding history is listed on RCO's website. There's like a place, you scroll just a little bit where there's buttons that say the different biennia, and if you click on them, it should have the list of funded projects. So if you're curious to see like the actual funding list for more information, you can go there. I also believe it's on DFW's barrier board website as well.
Right.
Alice beat me to it. I actually posted the link and where to scroll down to for those things. But thank you.
Thanks, Josh. So there's a link in the chat. Okay. So Jay asked, on eligibility, is a project eligible for funding if there is a full or partial fish barrier downstream, even if there is a project plan to remove the downstream barrier?
Good question, Joy. I can jump in and maybe let my colleagues at DFW clarify. So if there's a couple scenarios here, Jay. If there's a complete downstream barrier, in general, the project's not eligible. However, if the project is in a regionally prioritized, what's the word I'm looking for? A priority watershed, as identified by the regional salmon recovery region, there can be a coordinated effort to take care of those. So if you're in a priority watershed, again, what is that? Check out Manual 22 and you can see which projects are, or which watersheds are priority watersheds for the board. There's an option there that we just need to talk through. The second point is, if you have a downstream complete barrier, if that barrier is funded for correction in the next 5 years, and 5 years at the time of application, then we consider that being removed. So you don't have a downstream barrier. Partial barriers are a different story. If there's a downstream partial barrier, it'd be great to have a strategy to remedy that, but it doesn't make the upstream project ineligible. Did I get that all correct there? You guys need to clarify anything?
No, I think you're right, John. There can be downstream partial barriers associated with whatever, site you're submitting for. In the evaluation criteria, you get docked points for having downstream barriers. And so that's the consideration, is that you do lose points in the review and ranking process. But if your location does open up a substantial amount of habitat that may offset any points lost for downstream partial barriers.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that too, Joy? I think
Of course.
reach out to DFW as soon as possible, as soon as you know which project you're interested in, and we'll complete that quality habitat assessment. We don't want folks to be surprised by us finding another downstream barrier that's a total barrier that would disqualify your project. So we can complete those downstream checks pretty quickly and get you all information that your project will be eligible, and make sure that as you're applying, you can go forward.
Right. And we'll have contact information on the last slide if you don't have it already. Okay, Kate, just let me know that there's a hand up. Kate's gonna get that.
Yeah, it
person
looks
as
like
well.
Roy has a question. So Roy, I'm gonna prompt you to allow to speak, and you just need to accept that and then come off mute and you can ask your question.
Well, mine wasn't a question, it was just a comment and a thank you guys, because I've worked with this for a long time, and this is probably the most comprehensive overview to help not only myself, but others that we're bringing on board to work on projects like this out here on the Olympic Peninsula. So bravo to your team. Thank you very much.
No. Thank you. Great. Okay. Well, I'm moving over into some of the questions that have been answered, and this could be helpful for others to hear, and just want to make sure that there's no follow-up. So we'll start with MJH. How competitive and realistic is it to submit a grant proposal for a site that is considered a priority 2? And this one in particular is in the Chehalis area. Casey or others, do you want to reply to that?
Sure, I can just jump in and clarify my comment there. So there's a multitude of ways in which we assess, score, and rank these projects. We absolutely give deference to regional prioritizations, and there's components of the evaluation process where you would get more points if you were a top tier priority for local prioritization. But there's also many other questions that are scored that go into the ranking, and specifically, as I call out there, Appendix B in the manual 22 kind of details exactly what those questions are. So I'd encourage you to think about your project and look through all of those questions that are scored, as well as contacting us to talk about the project before you make a decision about whether or not to submit.
Thank you, Casey. Just noting, it looks like Alice, you have a clarification as well as John. Alice?
I think I'm gonna throw to John, so we just have one person talking about all the stuff, if that's cool.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. To a comment and a point of clarification. So the on the design build project option that Joel was walking through, there's in Prism he mentioned there's no option to select project type design build. So I would just go ahead and reach out to your grant manager at the time you want to start an application. We can get that design build project type in there for you and take care of that right off the bat. Like Joel said, there's going to be a relatively limited number of projects that design build is eligible for. These got to be relatively simple sites that you can quickly design and construct within the grant agreement period. So I just keep that in mind. The second point I wanted to make, Alice reminded me that we've run into a period of pretty high inflation. And so make sure that you're adding contingency costs into your budget. Recall, you're developing your application or you have designs in hand with an engineer's cost estimate now. And we're going to go through this grant application process, and you're not going to, if funded, you're not going to receive funding until July of 2027. Okay, so costs change a lot, and we've run into significant challenges over the last couple of years as we've seen kind of this spike in inflation for materials, engineering services, all those things, right? So just make sure you're thinking ahead when you create your budget and build in the contingency and inflationary costs into your budget. Typically, I guess I'll take this opportunity to also say, typically the board does not have funding for cost increases. Because the way the legislature has chosen to fund the board through a legislatively appropriated LEAP list, there is no extra funding. The only extra funding that we have available for cost increases is if a project completes their project under budget and returns funds.
Thank you, John. Okay. There's another question from MJH. According to the manual, design only with no match. Design must be completed in 2 years. Does this mean design documentation is completed and permits are included within that time frame? And I'll just read this because it's pretty clear cut. Josh noted that secured permits are not a requirement of fish barrier board funded design projects.
Thanks, Joey. And I should have added on to that pretty short answer that Appendix C in Manual 22 does provide a table, a handy table for planning, design build, and restoration projects where you can look at what's required at application or at the end of the project. And you'll notice in planning, there is a permitting section for planning projects, and they would only be required if you were very specific about stating, we plan on completing permits, but it's typically not expected for a planning phase unless you know you have funding for restoration coming quickly. But we know that there can be a gap between completing designs and actually getting funding for restoration.
Thank you, Josh. Okay. Mateo has a question. In order to get DFW staff to complete a habitat assessment before I submit my fish barrier grant application, how much time do they need and how do I get that process going? And Casey, did you want to summarize that?
Yeah, I just want to quick point of clarification there. You do not need a QHA completed as a component of your submitted application. That's something that DFW is required to complete prior to scoring and ranking, which, as I mentioned, for this round will take place during the spring and the summer of 2026. So as we've said, we highly recommend coordinating with us as soon as possible so that, we don't hit a bottleneck with these things in late winter, early spring. And just, let us know what site or sites and which stream or streams you are working on, and we will coordinate the QHA.
Thanks, Casey. Fran had a question. How much time should we plan on for the TRT reviews? And Josh noted 1 to 2 months. Anything else you want to add, Josh?
No, I'd be interested in if TRT team had any more to add to that. So the elements that could extend or shorten it.
Yeah, well, I thought that was you gave a good answer there, Josh. Yeah, just to know, it really depends on complexity of the project. For example, if you're proposing, a full abandonment removal, and then you're going to do a little bit of stream regrade with a good, stream simulation-based substrate gradation, plan review for something like that is pretty quick. On the flip side of that, if we have an alternative design, unique design, if we're doing something like a rough and channel review for those types of projects can take quite a bit longer. So it varies quite a bit depending on project.
It may also be worth noting we have had applicants apply for multiple barriers, some up to 5 barriers, and so designs may just have a lot of complexity due to the multiple barriers in a planning project.
Okay. Walter asked, where do I find the QHA scores? And Casey mentioned that they can be requested. Anything else you want to add to that, Casey? No. Okay. All right. Andrew asked, does DFW complete the QHAs automatically, unilaterally after applications are submitted in January, or do applicants need to coordinate with DFW to get this done? If the latter, when is QHA due, and about how much time do you recommend reserving to complete the process? Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, so again, it's DFW's responsibility to complete the process. QHAs have to be completed by DFW biologists or technicians. And then as we've been kind of saying throughout, early coordination is highly recommended. Bottom line is DFW needs to complete all QHAs for all submitted applications prior to scoring and ranking.
Great. Thank you. Stephen had a question. Lots on the QHAs. It was stated that these were completed in the previous biennium. The project that MCF is considering is on a small trib that is currently unnamed, but has salmon use. I doubt that it's been assessed. Is the QHA process something that needs to be completed before the application is submitted, or were all the waterways assessed in the previous biennium? Another one for Casey.
No, I would say we would not have a QHA for this. And hiking a small trip down there in MCF area sounds cool to me. So let us know which site or sites you're thinking about, and we can get that coordinated.
That's great. No name on this one. Do you have a quick criteria for guidance on deciding if this program or triple F double P is a better fit for a project? Casey?
Yeah, so there's quite a few differences in the way in which triple F2P and FBRB go through their ranking and scoring. Triple F2P is an open application. It's continuous. You can submit whenever. It's also just a short one-pager that you can pull right off of their website. Fill out that one-pager that gets sent to, at DFW, we have a biologist who is the DFW triple F2P bio. That individual would come out, take a look, and then they kind of coordinate scoring and ranking continuously, coming up with a project list once a year. So if you have a competitive project, triple F2P can be pretty quick. FBRB can take quite a bit more time. But yeah, general recommendation, given how short and quick the triple F2P application is as long as your site is eligible for triple F2P, remembering that they have a specific set of requirements for eligibility as well. Do that one pager, submit to triple F2P and FBRB as well.
I'd add that you can apply for both programs. You're not going to be excluded from one if you've applied for the other. So if you have a project that's been in the queue for triple F double P for a while and not funded, there's other projects that have come in that are more competitive and higher priority, then maybe Fish Barrier Removal Board is an option to get that project funding a little bit more quickly. But everything that Casey said is applicable. I just wanted to put that out there that both programs are valid potentially.
Great.
One little trick about the triple F double P program is if you happen to get funding from both grant programs at the same time, and say maybe your cost went up and you're thinking, oh, maybe I could use one to match the other. Triple F double P is one program that does not match with other RCO programs. So you'd want to pick one or the other.
Great. Question from Anna that just came up. Can you review or clarify the criteria for the habitat quality component of the QHA? Where does a score of 300 fall? Is it low, medium, or higher quality?
Yeah, good question. So a score of 300 is that's kind of an exceedingly low score. There's usually only a couple sites that come in that are even in that range. The vast majority of projects are far and away above that. The score, as the slide showed, is based on 5 habitat metrics, and it's modified by the distance of habitat gain. Happy to discuss more about the kind of the overall process if you want to get in touch with us, Anna. But yeah, it's essentially a distance modified by the quality of the habitat, and from your target site, the distance is up to the 3rd partial barrier, the 1st total barrier, or the natural end of fish use. So then you take whatever that distance is, multiply it based on the scores for those 5 habitat metrics, and that is how you get at your score. Again, 300 is very low. I would say our average FBRB submittal is between 5 and 10,000. And we usually have a few standouts that are in the 10, 20, 30,000. So, but yeah, happy to chat more with you about the specifics of that if you'd like to contact me.
I would add, Joy, also the QHA methodology has been included in Manual 22 in the scoring criteria. And, to Casey's point, it's a linear gain in meters times the habitat modifier, and, decent habitat is, it's on a scale between 0 and 2 or something. A decent habitat's 1. So if you have 300 meters and you can multiply that habitat as average habitat by 1, then that's your minimum 300. Grossly simplifying that.
Thank you. Question from Andrew. It's 2 parts. Are landowner agreements required for planning projects?
I could take that one, Joy. Let me make sure I understand the question. Are landowner agreements required for planning projects? The answer to that is they are not required. But we would encourage folks to be working through those. You don't know exactly what the agreement will say when it comes time for project construction, but having an open relationship and communication with the landowners will be really important through the design phase, even if you don't end up getting a landowner agreement. So not required, but again, the landowner acknowledgement form is required at the time of application. Landowner agreement is not required for planning, but encourage you're going to be expected to get a landowner agreement eventually when the project's completed, so set the stage for that.
Can I add to that really quick? To John's point about landowner agreements, reviewing them with your landowners if you're doing design. And that's because there are long-term obligations associated with a project when it's constructed. So it's really important that the landowner understands that long-term relationship that will be established if the project gets constructed under an RCO grant. So if you don't expect to pursue RCO funds, then that I would say you wouldn't necessarily need to review that. But that's the point John's making about the landowner relationship. Like if you continue down the road and anticipate, additional RCO grants for construction, they should know that, we're expected for the project to be maintained, that RCO and DFW staff that you see here will want to have access to do site visits to make sure it's been maintained over time, those kinds of terms. But, it should not be signed by a landowner during a design project because it's it's that binding agreement and conditions for a constructed project that is moot for a design project.
Thank you, Alice. And that second part of the question sounds answered well, so we'll move on. New question came in from Walter. What does the funding look like for this grant round?
That's a great question. It's unknown. You know, that's determined by the legislature when they're in session. I would point folks though, it's to the historic program funding level. Again, that's, you know, between 25 and 50 million over the program's history. But yeah, we'll know more, you know, the next steps here are applications come in, are reviewed, the board reviews and ranks and prioritizes those and submits that to the legislature. And then we'll get a governor's budget, you know, the end of 2026, which will identify funding for this program. And then the legislature will go into session and hopefully pass a capital budget ahead of July 1st, 2027. And that's the point when we'll know exactly what the funding amount is.
John. Okay. Another new question from Kevin. The QHA questions are surely related to sponsors wondering if they should even bother applying. Kevin imagines that DFW can't just spring into action and check new sites for us in some instances. Is there a way to share the QHA manual for sponsors to do a real check or gut check on whether this project will meet the QHA muster?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. Good question, Kevin. So happy to share the QHA protocol if folks wanted to see what we do, but the quick gut check is, well, I guess I'll back up. You're welcome to send any sites. If there isn't an existing site ID, send us coordinates of where the site is. Scoping bios or inventory and assessment technicians can do a quick desktop-based check and get you a definitive answer or a pretty definitive answer quickly. Folks like yourself, Kevin, I know are pretty well versed in our FPDSI web map. So essentially what we would do if that information was sent to us was we would go to FPDSI, go to the site, put on LiDAR, measure that distance to that first upstream barrier. Or sorry, the third partial, the first total, or the end of the stream, and just take a quick look at, okay, what's the distance? Because that distance measurement alone for a lot of these sites, you know, it doesn't take much to get above that 300. As John Foltz mentioned, that 300 would be 300 meters. So that's a pretty minimum value. Again, up to third partial or first total. Folks like yourself, who I know use our web map, would be able to do that real quick. Again, we're happy to take a quick look on our end. If you just send us site IDs, or if there aren't site IDs, send us coordinates. And that's something, you know, that would take us 5-10 minutes to take a quick look and get back to you.
Just to add to that really quick. Thanks, Casey. That was a great answer. I think we have dedicated funding right now for folks to go check out these systems and to do those quality habitat assessments, and staff on deck ready to do those. So the sooner we can get information about which projects sponsors are considering, the faster we can get those planned out and ready to go. Typically, we get a lot of folks reaching out for QHAs closer to the deadline of when applications are submitted, and that's when it gets really tight for us. So the faster you can kind of get something in the queue, the easier it will be for us to get you an answer and kind of plan out that work.
Thank you, Kaylee. Okay. I see one more question. So if you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or add them in to the Q&A. Is there a manual for project control and tenure? Josh noted there is not, and to direct questions to the RCO staff. Anything to add on that?
Not from me.
Okay. So I just want to pause and see if there's any other questions. Do let us know, staff, anything else you would like to add. Okay. Kate, do you see anything in the queue?
Joy, this is John. I'll jump in on the question about control and tenure. There's not a manual on it, but it's discussed in Manual 22. I would just say, in a nutshell, the project location needs to either be sponsor owned or have a landowner agreement signed ahead of construction for all the properties that aren't owned by the landowner.
Right. Okay. Well, unless there's something else in the queue, then we can let folks go. I want to make sure that staff has shared everything they want to share. You can see that the contacts are here on the page if you need to reach out. And then Kate just shared some materials. I'll pause and see if there's any final words from John, Josh, Joel, others, Kaylee, Alice, Casey, anything else?
I'd say that we're, the DFW and RCO team's here to help. If you've got questions, this is meant to be a high-level overview. Make sure you check out Manual 22, the other recorded application modules on RCO's site. And don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, every fish passage barrier and project has some unique aspects about it, and we can talk through any of that. We're here to support it. This is a voluntary program working on addressing fish passage across Washington State, and I think that's a team effort. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're here if you have any follow-up questions or project-specific questions.
Great. Okay. And just to note that this presentation that was recorded will be added to the RCO website. Kate just added that into the chat, as well as other recordings to help you through this process. Again, you might want to take a screenshot of the RCO and DFW contacts here for easy access. And with that, unless there's anything else from staff, we will let you go a bit early. So thank you. Nice job, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.